All right, we are live with the second rendition of Practical Self-Help. My name is Rob.
My name is Jim.
And here we go. The thing I wanted to talk about today is something that me and Jim have talked about multiple times over the last, a couple months. And it first came to my attention, the guy who wrote Dilbert has a couple different things on YouTube about Trump's superpower. And what he talks about as Trump's superpower is the ability to label people. And once they get labeled, they can't get rid of it. Like he called him Little Marco, and he called him, and he said Jeb as low energy Jeb or something.
Yeah.
But for people in recovery, for people that are looking for self-help, I always thought that he had a different superpower. And that superpower is the ability to compartmentalize and put behind him his failures. I thought that is such a great lesson for anybody that's looking to get into self-help or get into who is in recovery. And I'm making no assertions on his political stances. I'm not doing any kind of.
This is not a tacit endorsement.
This is not an endorsement of Donald Trump or his policies or anything like that. But I give the example of his massive failure at building that casino in New Jersey.
Yeah, the Taj Mahal.
The Taj Mahal. Massive, undeniable failure. But when he gets interviewed and they ask him about that failure, he always says it wasn't a failure. He always says it was a triumphant victory. He has that ability to, even in failure, learn.
Right.
Take from that experience lessons. How many other casinos did the guy build? None.
Yeah.
Right. He learned from it. He took away what he needed, and therefore it's not a failure. Whereas most people, including myself, little things in life I'll dwell on 10 years later.
Right.
Little things in life that I've not necessarily failed at, but I consider a failure in my mind, I'll think about all the time. And I don't think of them positively, like it actually was a lesson that I learned. It's very hard for a lot of people to put things behind them. And he has this amazing ability to turn around even bad things.
He does. And one of the big takeaways for me from our conversations in the last few months about this, I have a tendency to put labels on people, and not that they stick in the general public, but they stick in my head. Right. And from here on out, this person is this thing. And I have a really difficult time getting away from that. And this particular election cycle, I guess, for me, there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of disappointment. And in this conversation between us, it's helped me. It's allowed me to see something about a person that I don't care for much. Right. That is a positive quality. And that has kind of bled into other areas of my life, where there are people who are, whether they're people in recovery or people just around town, or people who are in my life on a pretty consistent basis, who I don't care much for and have a judgment or have slapped a label on. I'm able to kind of take that from our conversation and find something good about them. And it's kind of helped to change my relationship, my outlook on people in general, and my relationship to the world again. Right. So, but yeah, I think, to be able to look at him and see that he doesn't allow those failures to stand in the way. He takes a lesson and he moves forward from that, and is able to take something that would, for me, I can speak for myself, it would weigh me down considerably if I had built a casino and it had failed. Yeah.
In public.
Yeah.
In front of everybody.
Failure. Yeah.
And led to a bankruptcy.
Yeah. And that's,
Dude, people go bankrupt from just credit cards from buying garbage they didn't need.
Yeah.
And it devastates them for 10 years.
Yeah. And nobody knows except them and their tax attorney or whoever helped them file for it. So it definitely is a quality that that I think we could all probably learn some lessons from, you know.
And there's so many self-help examples of the same thing. Michael Jordan in his book talks about you see me winning championships. You see me making all these baskets. You didn't see the hundreds of thousands of baskets I missed.
Yeah.
You don't see, the guy that owns the Mavericks, the famous Texan billionaire, Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban, yeah.
You know, and all these guys, they'll tell you, when you see them succeed, you don't see all the failures that led up to that.
Yeah.
All the lessons that led up to that. It's about compartmentalizing the failures, learning from them, and moving on as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
If it takes you 10 years to move on, that in itself is the failure.
Yeah.
You know, dealing with issues that hold people down, getting over them as fast as you can is as much of a win as succeeding.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, even in the case of somebody like Michael Jordan, who has a spectacular record in one arena of sports or one segment of the sports world, he went on to play baseball and did not do well.
Did not do well.
And had, I wouldn't say a similar, he had a public failure of sorts of his own, and that didn't stop him at all.
Right.
I mean, he went back, played ball for a few more years, played basketball for a few more years, and then ended up owning a team in Florida, I believe.
He owns the Bobcats right now in North Carolina.
Oh, no, the Carolina Bobcats.
He came back and played with the Wizards in basketball. And
Played with the Wizards, yeah.
He played with the Wizards, and he averaged over 30 points a game.
Oh.
Came back to what he knew.
So, yeah, I think, I've heard... I watch TED Talks periodically, and I've heard a lot of people talk about those failures as, opportunities to learn lessons and to know what not to do in the future, maybe know what to do better. I've heard specific people, though, in the case of like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, like we didn't see the hundreds of thousands of failed lines of code that were written trying to formulate an operating system that worked. And, and even in the case of, let's say, Apple, they were pretty much done. You know, they failed as a company, and Steve Jobs came back after Pixar and sort of rewrote the rule book.
And he had a failure in between that. He started a computer company on his own called Cube or something like that, and it was a massive failure. And Windows has released, they've had a lot of public failures with, operating systems that were just dismal. For the Xbox, for example. I mean, they've released entire systems that they knew failed just to get them out there on the market and kind of push through that initial failure and revamp as they were going. I mean, they've turned it into a way of doing business. Using those failures. And sometimes as a consumer, that's really frustrating and that makes you angry. But I do think it's admirable to continue to push forward through those failures. And not only that, pushing through, but getting over them. The other thing for a individual, for a person, one of the other aspects is you personally are not your failures.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The things that you don't do well in life aren't who you are. That's a big thing. I had another thought on that same topic, but I forgot what I was gonna say. But getting over them, moving on, pushing through, it's probably the biggest lesson when you encounter failure. Oh, this is what I was gonna say. The other thing is certain failures include somebody else. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't put other people's failures, especially when you're in a relationship or something like that, other people's failures on yourself. It is not a reflection of you. And a lot of guys, a lot of single guys, they'll go pick up on go hit on a girl and she'll reject them. And they're like, oh, what did I do wrong? You didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have no idea what's going through that other person's head. That is not a reflection of you. getting into business partnerships and it goes down. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It could be, so many different factors, failing at a job. You could just have bad boss, bad culture. But I think the biggest lesson is move on as fast as possible and don't repeat your failures. And
I've recently, I believe it actually was another TED Talk where there was a guy who set up a 100-day experiment for himself where he set himself up for failure for 100 days straight, where it was asking people for a loan or to come and clean his house or just ridiculous things that he knew he would get rejection. Mm-hmm. He knew that he would be rejected, and he did this intentionally and talked about it as a tremendous character building experience where he learned to see those failures again as opportunities and learned how to move past the rejection in a pretty rapid way. And I think for me as an adult human man, I have a hard time moving past rejection. I mean, whether it's in my marriage or with a job, my most recent employment, I was with a great organization for a few months, and some things changed really rapidly and kind of out of the blue, and I was no longer employed. My job didn't exist. And, that was hard not to internalize.
And truthfully, it's not a reflection of you whatsoever.
Not at all.
The organization changed.
Yeah. It wasn't me at all. But to not take that on as something I did wrong, as somehow it's a failure. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. And I think the more that I talk to people, we were having a conversation earlier about Facebook, about social media. People tend to put the best parts of their life up. They don't advertise the bad stuff, right? The uncomfortable and disappointing things that occur. And for me, I had a problem similar to what we talked about comparing myself with people I grew up with, people I went to high school or college with, and how great they were doing in their life just based on their photos and these little snapshots.
Their curated
life
that they put out there for you to consume.
Right. And when I've gotten together and had these face-to-face conversations, number one, it's shown me that my experience as an adult human man is not all that unique.
Right.
And these feelings of inadequacy or vulnerability or emptiness or whatever aren't unique to me. I'm not the only one feeling them. And all of a sudden I'm not alone in this world.
Right.
And, and I think what sets those people that we've talked about, be it Trump, Michael Jordan, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, any of those really successful people, is that they have this ability. Where it comes from, Malcolm Gladwell has done a lot of work about this, right. But that I don't think that they're a different species. Right. I guess is what I'm getting at. I think that's something that can be cultivated, like any skill within us, and it's.
I think it lies in most of the 12-step programs. We talk about acceptance, and I think it lies somewhere in there. Self-worth and acceptance of what is, acceptance of self, because I know that I have self-doubt constantly.
Oh yeah.
Constant self-doubt. And people that like a Mark Cuban, it only seems like there's a lot of no self-doubt. He doesn't take it personal. Whereas people in AA, NA, CMA, OA, gamblers and whatever it is, a lot of us internalize, and there's a lack of not only self-acceptance, but really hard. It's really hard to accept reality or what is.
Yeah.
And,
I think a lot of especially in the last 10, 15 years, a lot of the work that's been done around addictions or destructive compulsions or compulsive behaviors, sort of at the root of that, down at the bottom of that, is that feeling of inadequacy, and that those internalized failures, those things that we do take personally. and just trying to fill that or cover that up in some way, that causes, again, more of those feelings.
Right.
Because I can speak from my experience, when I'm in those behaviors, those modes, I am definitely destructive, and I cause problems. And
You can exacerbate your own problems.
yeah, absolutely.
And you can make things that are perceived failures bigger than they really are.
Oh, much bigger.
Much bigger.
Much bigger. So that it's...
And so often they have nothing to do with you.
No, not at all.
Nothing to do with you.
Not at all.
Your company getting rid of your position has nothing to do with you.
No.
It's not personal.
No. It wasn't a performance issue. It wasn't a personality issue. It was just a business decision.
Yeah, and people are in industries all the time across the country that they have downturns. I mean, I work in the oil business, it has downturns.
Oh,
and that's
yeah.
just how it is. People work in the automotive business up in Detroit. It has downturns. It has nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
But it makes not only, your job is so much a part of what you do. Your business is so much a part of what you do. And when it makes living difficult, but it's not part of who you are,
Well, and there's something that happened, I think, between World War II and Vietnam. There was this a series of promises were made for stability and security and consistency, and you stick with us and we'll stick with you. And people began to look at corporations and institutions as people that you could rely on,
right?
And as things with a personality, as things with character. And granted, if a company makes a good product, or a person provides a good service, I mean, there is an amount of character that is involved with that. But ultimately, institutions are not people. They don't have those personal characteristics. And when they make decisions for their own survival, for their own growth and profit, they do affect people who have emotions and it's hard not to take those things personally. I think Detroit is a really good example of that, because that city has, there are multiple cities in the Rust Belt, and you can look at a city like Pittsburgh and a city like Detroit, who were both industrial cities, and how they've handled that transition into, we don't really have industry in the United States anymore,
right.
Not the way we did in the 50s.
Not manufacturing, for sure.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh has embraced, the green movement and arts and culture, and they've gone in and renovated and to some degree gentrified areas, and not to say everything they've done is perfect, but that city's thriving now.
Yeah.
Where Detroit is still dying.
Right.
It's just in the process of that slow death.
Right.
And that really affects people who, I think, even multi-generationally, they've in turn, a grandfather gets laid off from the Ford plant, and his son sees that and passes on those kind of attitudes to their children. And I'm not saying that it's that the decay of that city is any one person or any one character's fault, but that, I think, is a good example of internalizing a failure of something else, something else. External.
Right. And it can affect your mood.
Absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Trump's superpower. Not where the guy who made Dilbert, I forgot his name, but where he said that his superpower was labeling. I think his superpower, where it could help people looking, in recovery or self-help, is to be able to get past your failures and look at them as successes and move on as fast as you can.
For sure.
Because it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.